Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. What's up, fellas? I want to share with you a recent development in my life that's a little bit out of the ordinary and quite profound. So for the past 3 weeks, I have been meditating 2 to 3 hours a day, every single day. Now, this started about 3 weeks ago when I went on vacation where I rented this cabin in the woods in Old Fort, North Carolina, and I brought down with me Dr. Joe Dispenza's most recent book, which came out a couple years ago now, called Becoming Supernatural. And the book is all about, it's such an inspiring book about how to heal trauma, how to shift emotions that have been stuck in your body, how to change your mind that has been one way your entire life, and then creating a new mind, a new inner critic that is much more supportive, that's much more loving, that's much more ambitious, and breaking the conditioning of your past. And a big part of that is learning how to direct your thoughts, learning how to think bigger than you currently feel, learning how to not just accept the feeling of your environment, how you wake up each day, what the news says on a given day, maybe the mood that you have on a given day, not to accept that as your state, but to actually direct your mind to higher ground. And he's got these brilliantly produced meditations that are super long, like 45 minutes to 85 minutes long on his website. They're like 30 to 40 bucks a pop. I downloaded them while I was there. And I just got into this rhythm of doing these meditations every single day, a couple times a day. And what I started to find was, like, in a pretty short period of time, I would say in a week, there was almost like a new mind that I was able to tap into. Less critical, less noisy, less overbearing, and much more allowing, much more free, just kind of like peacefulness, almost as if I was walking through my days in a more meditative state. And what's been really interesting is I've kept this going for the past 2 or 3 weeks. My mood has been super elevated. I've never done this much meditation for this period of time. I've done a 10-day silent meditation in Hawaii 4 years ago. But outside of that, if I did 1 hour of meditation in a given day, that's like a grand slam. So to do 2 or 3 hours per day for 3 weeks is kind of transformational for me. And I'll be talking more about that in the future after I get a couple maybe months under my belt of doing something like this. I've recalibrated my schedule to accommodate that. I understand from my brethren who are in the corporate world or brethren who have, children and families, that 2 to 3 hours is just like not at all an option for you. And my heart goes out. I empathize. And sometimes back like 10 years ago when I was still in corporate and I listened to Tim Ferriss talk about the 4-hour work week and, putting in 30 minutes of work per day, I used to be like, dude, go fuck yourself. Because you didn't know my existence. And so I just want you to know I hear you. I feel you guys. But this 2 to 3 hour a day meditation experiment has started to shift my chemistry in some really profound ways. And like I said, in the next couple of months, even if I don't keep up this level of tenacity and intensity, there are some things that I will want to share with you in the near future about an experiment like this. So today, let's talk about the thing that the world needs to be talking about, which is more trustworthy leadership. The world needs trustworthy masculine leaders now more than ever. Now more than ever. And one of the things that I have come to learn in working with men is that one of the things that we crave at our absolute core is to be trusted in our leadership. There is nothing quite so rewarding as to step into a leadership position, to say this is where we are going, and then to have others enthusiastically follow. I could feel shivers down my spine as I think about that, right? Think about those moments where you've put a stake in the ground or you've made a definitive statement, or maybe even weren't so confident in what you were doing, but then had others enthusiastically follow. Is there any greater feeling than that? And then conversely, there's nothing quite so deflating or infuriating than to have your leadership doubted, resisted, poked at, prodded at. Now listen, that stuff comes with the territory of being a leader. And depending on what context that's happening, maybe in your romantic relationship, that could be terrible when that kind of stuff happens. It can feel terrible. It's not necessarily a terrible thing. It can feel terrible. In business, it can cause you to question whether or not like you're the right person for the job in your other communities that matter to you. Now, again, that kind of stuff, resistance, doubt, poking, prodding, that all comes with the territory of being a leader. But if your most common experience of leading in your relationship or in business or in your communities is one of being resisted and doubted and poked at and prodded and picked apart, that can cause a lot of anxiety, anguish, because what leadership really is it runs to the core of our being. The most powerful leaders are directly aligned to the essence of who they are. It sits at the root of who we are as a man. And when we are out of alignment, it's one of the easiest ways for our leadership to be doubted. And so one of the ways that we can stay in alignment regularly with our deepest core, our deepest essence of who we are as leaders, is to develop principles around which we organize our lives, our leadership styles. And I'm going to be going into 3 principles that trustworthy masculine leaders employ. And these are the 3 principles that the Great Man Mastermind, the men of the Great Man Mastermind, live by. So to set this up, I thought it would be cool, and I may do this as an experiment today, and I may continue doing more of this in future podcasts. I want to read to you a little section from my new book, On Purpose Leadership: Master the Art of Leading Yourself so you can inspire and impact others. And one of the things that I write about in this book about staying on purpose, living in alignment, leading from a place of purpose and alignment, is the construction of principles that can guide your behavior. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book, and then I'm going to break down the 3 principles that trustworthy masculine leaders embody. Okay, so here we go. This is from chapter 3, the chapter titled On Principles. Tony Hayward was the harebrained CEO of BP, the oil company, during the catastrophic oil spill of 2010. After a tragic and fatal explosion on the Deepwater Horizon, 210 million gallons of crude oil was pumped into the Gulf of Mexico over an 87-day period, making it the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. For some reason, Hayward didn't find this to be a big deal. He publicly stated, quote, "The Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean. The amount of volume of oil and dispersant we are putting into it is tiny in relation to the total water volume. I think the environmental impact of this disaster is likely to be very, very modest." End quote. Now, if you want a textbook example of what the abdication of leadership looks like, there it is. He had quite a few public relations doozies just like this. His most infamous one was when he turned his company's inability to stem the environmental disaster into a woe is me moment. And he said, I quote, "There's no one who wants this over more than I do. I'd like my life back." End quote. Now, calling Hayward's petulant response tone deaf would be an understatement, considering 11 BP employees literally lost their lives in the oil rig explosion, and he was complaining about the inconvenience of having to clean up his own mess. Hayward was eviscerated by the media, and customers refused to patronize BP's gas stations, and I was one of them. By October 1st, 2010, Tony Hayward was no longer CEO of BP. Clearly, Tony Hayward did not rely upon any guiding principles during this wartime disaster scenario. Now let's juxtapose the BP oil spill fiasco with what can happen when leaders rely upon intentionally designed principles to guide their behaviors in the most chaotic of situations. In 1982, Tylenol was the sacred cow of Johnson & Johnson's product portfolio. At the time, Tylenol accounted for 19% of Johnson & Johnson's corporate profits, and it outsold its top 4 competitors, Anacin, Bayer, Bufferin, and Excedrin combined. If Tylenol were a standalone business, its profits would have placed it in the Fortune 250. Think about that. And then in 1982, a disturbed individual decided to start slipping cyanide-laced capsules into the Tylenol extra strength containers. 7 unsuspecting customers were tragically killed. And suddenly, Tylenol found itself sucker punched and reeling on its heels from a massive public relations nightmare, having to respond to and defend why its trusted product was now killing innocent civilians. Throughout this crisis, over 100,000 separate news stories ran in U.S. newspapers, making it the widest covered U.S. news story since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Johnson & Johnson chairman James Burke immediately formed a 7-member strategy team with 2 questions that served as guiding principles for disaster protocol. Number 1, how do we protect the people? And number 2, how do we save this product? Notice which of those guiding principles came first and which came second. This distinction of priority is ultimately what most experts attribute J&J's ability to not only save its number 1 brand, but also come out on the other side thriving. Johnson & Johnson made the tough decision to direct the public to immediately cease all consumption and purchase of Tylenol products until the extent of the contamination could be determined. According to the New York Times, this decision cost the company $100 million. And that's $250 million in today's economy, right? 100 million was back in 1982 dollars. But Johnson & Johnson stood firm in their commitment to protecting the people, which they also knew would ultimately protect the product. They established a 1-800 hotline to support customer concerns and field questions. And 6 months later, Tylenol became the first company ever to produce tamper-resistant packaging to the market. According to the Department of Defense case study on crisis management, quote, scholars have come to recognize Johnson & Johnson's handling of the Tylenol crisis as the example for success when confronted with a threat to an organization's existence. Berg lauds the case in the following manner. Berg was the person who wrote the Department of Defense case study. The Tylenol crisis is without a doubt the most exemplary case ever known in the history of crisis communications. Any business executive who has ever stumbled into a public relations ambush ought to appreciate the way Johnson & Johnson responded to the Tylenol poisonings. They have effectively demonstrated how major business has to handle a disaster. End quote. This very well could have been a death knell for Tylenol. And yet, because of Johnson & Johnson's leadership's handling of the crisis, following its own guiding principles, Tylenol was able to restore faith with the public and fully recover its market share. Your life and your leadership will be tested in the most unpredictable and stressful of ways. So when push comes to shove, what foundation will you stand upon to keep you leading on purpose? Will you be swept away into abdicating your leadership responsibilities like Tony Hayward of BP? Or will you remain firmly rooted in your guiding principles like the executive leadership team at Tylenol? The principles of an on-purpose leader serve as your foundation and roots, your anti-drift devices to weather any storm and lead with integrity. The definition of a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or a chain of reasoning. I want you to think of principles as the bumpers in the bowling alley that keep you from careening off into the gutter. The entire philosophy in Jocko Willink and Leif Babson's New York Times bestselling leadership book, Extreme Ownership, hinges on principles developed by the Navy SEALs. And 3 examples are: extreme ownership, the leader must own everything in his or her world. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders. And check the ego. The absence of intentionally designed principles are reasons why companies like Enron and people like Harvey Weinstein happen. In the heat of battle, it's all too easy to drift off course, cut corners, pass blame, and break integrity. On-purpose leaders, however, subscribe to a defined set of principles where intentionality and integrity guide every behavior. And that's the excerpt from my new book, On Purpose Leadership, Master the Art of Leading Yourself so you can inspire and impact others. So as you can hear from those two case studies, the BP oil spill, the Tylenol disaster, one company ended up taking a big hit. CEO got fired, took years to recover, and probably never will, at least from the eyes of the public. And then Tylenol ended up coming out the other side strong, reputable, trustworthy, with case studies taught in business schools all around the world as how to handle a situation in crisis management. And when push came to shove, it was the principles that guided the decisions that were made that created the fate of both of these companies. So when the men of the Great Man Mastermind come together, we set out a series of principles that we live by that provide clarity during times of confusion. It came in real handy these last 4 or 5 months as our world got rocked, as the future became increasingly uncertain. And what principles can do during those times of uncertainty, it gives you the bumpers in the bowling alley, the guardrails to keep you from careening off, drifting off into poor behavior. So, principle number 1, you've already actually heard me say it a few times, and it's the subtitle of my book on purpose leadership. Principle number 1 of a trustworthy masculine leader is, I master the art of leading myself so I can inspire and impact others. A true leader, a trustworthy masculine leader, knows that he has no business leading other people until he has his house in order first. And in my book, I write about how so many of the biggest leaders of some of the most respected companies who brought me in to do coaching, consulting, speaking engagements, their first questions would always be about how they could get their people to change. And when I was able to go behind the hood and start to see what that leader was living and leading from, they were embodying the very behaviors that they wished to change in their employees or the people that they were pointing fingers at, right? They were the ones who didn't have the vision or the confidence or the peace of mind or their days structured appropriately or priorities in order. And yet they were pointing at everyone else first. So a true leader, a great man, knows that he must master the art of leading himself, because by doing so, he can inspire and impact others just by showing up how he is naturally in his essence. And I found this out over the last 10 years of living my life, where I'd always doubted my ability to lead others or felt a sense of fear in leading others. Well, it was because there were gaps and blind spots in how I led myself, right? Like, you know my story about, if you haven't listened to the show before, my story of sex addiction and the 4 years I spent there. Right? There was a big area of my life hidden from the rest of the world that was way out of order. And when I was able to master that area of my life, then I didn't have to try as hard to lead others. In fact, other people came knocking on my door. So a great man, number 1, masters the art of leading himself so he can inspire and impact others. Second. The second principle of a trustworthy masculine leader is, I lean out over my edge constantly in everything I do. Now, this is a quote inspired by David Dada's book, The Way of the Superior Man, where he says that a man who is living his purpose leans out over his edge in everything he does. He doesn't shrink back from his edge out of fear, and he doesn't throw himself over the edge because he's just trying to prove a point or he's too egoic or he bites off more than he can chew and then collapses under the overwhelm and the weight of the responsibilities that he's burdened himself with over the course of his life. A great leader, a trustworthy masculine leader, knows where his edge is, and he leans out over it constantly, because that perfect place of excitement and fear is where growth occurs. And to have the awareness of where that edge is one thing that most men, many leaders, do not have. And I hear this, fellas, all the time in the complaints of women who say, I'm tired of hearing how tired my man is when he comes home. Yes, I know you're living a big life, fellas. Like, I know you are biting off a lot, in your life and you're providing for your family and you're doing the thing to put bacon on, bring home the bacon and put bread on the table. And if when you come home, you're exhausted and have no energy left to lead your family or to be engaged in your family, that's not sexy either. In fact, you've leaned too far out over your edge. You've fallen off the edge. And what people in our lives, especially the romantic relationships in your life, want to see you go to your edge and still have something in the tank, your best stuff for them as well. So a trustworthy masculine leader leans out over his edge constantly in everything he does, doesn't shrink back, doesn't tip over. And then the third and final principle of a trustworthy masculine leader, if you've listened to the show at all, you've heard Brian and I bang on this. I create environments where I and those I care about can thrive. A great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive. This goes hand in hand with the ability to master the art of leading yourself. If you cannot create an environment for yourself, work-wise, health-wise, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, your actual home environment, if you can't create an environment where you yourself can thrive, how could you ever do that for other people? It's got to start with you first. And when you master creating environments where you thrive, where you feel energized, where you feel energetic, where you get good sleep, where you are nutritionally sound, where your digestive system feels good, where you are alert, where you are spending your time in your greatest energy, when you become a master of creating those environments for yourself, then you can thrive. And then you can take the perspective and the vantage point of looking at the business that you run, the family that you lead, and creating an environment where they can thrive as well. And this is something that's super important as we're talking about how the world needs more leaders now more than ever, is being able to look at the environment that we're operating in, where there's fear, anxiety, uncertainty, confusion, overwhelm, exhaustion. And we need leaders, trustworthy masculine leaders, to step up and to create new environments where people can stabilize, get their bearings together, feel a sense of control and hope and inspiration for the future so that they can start to thrive. Our local economies can start to thrive. Our global economies can start to thrive, and we can build this thing back better than it ever has been before. So the three principles of a trustworthy masculine leader are: number one, I master the art of leading myself first so I can inspire and impact others. Number two, I lean out over my edge constantly in everything I do. And number three, I create environments where I and those I care about can thrive. Now, if you want more about this, I encourage you to buy the book On Purpose Leadership, Master the Art of Leading Yourself so you can inspire and impact others. It is available for pre-order now. And if you order it and want to send me your receipt, we've got a whole bunch of free bonuses coming your way, like guided meditations, recorded webinars on how to design your morning and evening routines, and a few other things, worksheets that are going to go along with the book. So you can always email that to me at dominic@dominicq.com. And On Purpose Leadership is available anywhere online that you buy books. And remember to email me your receipt at dominic@dominicq.com. And to close this thing out, just remember that there's nothing quite as rewarding as you stepping up to lead, whether it's in your relationship, your community, or in your business, and having others enthusiastically follow. And one of the ways that will happen is to live by these three principles of a trustworthy masculine leader. I will see you on the front lines.